Under a sky heavy with the murmurs of destiny, the ceremonial grounds beckoned with an eerie silence that felt as though it could swallow entire lifetimes. In that charged moment, Amara took her first determined steps onto the ancient stone floor, her heart pounding like a distant war drum. Every step she took reverberated with the echo of forgotten legends, a reminder that she was standing at the crossroads of fate and freedom. The air was thick with anticipation, and a palpable weight pressed upon her shoulders, as if the very universe had conspired to mark this day with an inescapable destiny. The crowd, an assembly of noble onlookers and spectral figures from a realm steeped in tradition, watched with bated breath. Their eyes, dark with curiosity and silent judgment, pierced into the depths of her being. They came to witness the unfurling of an ancient ritual, one as old as the land itself, an act that would declare her existence bound to a force beyond her control. In that moment, amidst an unsettling blend of pride and despair, Amara wondered whether her soul was ready to bear the burden of a destiny that had been written long before her first cry. Standing nearby was her father, King Arik, a figure shrouded in both authority and enigmatic sorrow. His presence, imposing yet cryptic, radiated the unspoken weight of responsibility. His eyes, cold and inscrutable, betrayed flashes of internal conflict, a mingling of royal pride and a deep-seated melancholy that hinted at sacrifices made long ago. As his silent gaze met Amara's, it seemed to command not just obedience, but also acceptance of the inescapable. And yet, beneath that veneer of stoic command lay a storm of emotions that neither time nor power could fully quell. Suddenly, the hush was broken by the graceful yet unwavering presence of the priestess. Draped in iridescent, shimmering robes that seemed to capture the ethereal glow of the heavens, she stepped forward. Her voice, both calm and mesmerizing, carried over the hushed assembly as she proclaimed the sacred ritual. "Today, we gather to unveil the destiny chosen by the threads of fate," she intoned, her words floating like gentle incantations in the cool evening air. In that pivotal moment, the very fabric of reality seemed to tremble, poised on the knife's edge between hope and despair. As the priestess held aloft a mystical orb pulsating with a soft, otherworldly light, Amara felt a magnetic pull deep within her core. The orb's glow cast shifting shadows on the ground, and with every heartbeat, the magic in the air thickened, weaving an unseen tapestry of destiny around the young princess. The atmosphere was charged with foreboding, a delicate balance of beauty and terror that set the stage for the unrelenting force about to be unleashed. A sudden, almost imperceptible shiver danced along Amara's skin as she sensed the beginning of something immutable. Time itself appeared to slow as the orb's energy surged, igniting sparks along her wrist. It was then that a burning mark, intricate and haunting as the clawed print of a mythical wolf, began to etch itself into her flesh. The pain was ferocious, a wild, fiery sensation that raced through her veins, intertwining with her very essence and sealing her fate in a flash of incandescent light. For a moment, the world around her faded into insignificance as the mark blazed, with an intensity that rivaled the setting sun. It was a symbol of irrevocable connection, a reminder that the chain of destiny had been fastened onto her spirit. In that brief instant, Amara's inner world exploded with a tumult of conflicting emotions, fear, defiance, and an unyielding spark of rebellion that refused to be extinguished. Even as her body trembled under the onslaught of the marking, her soul whispered a desperate promise, one that transcended the constraints of this ordained fate. "I won't be his," she vowed silently, a fragile but fierce declaration that reverberated through the corridors of time. Yet even as these fierce words echoed within her, the reality of her situation set in with crushing certainty. In that communal silence, filled with both the tangible magic of the ritual and the oppressive weight of tradition, Amara recognized that the bonds of destiny were not easily shattered. Caught between the resounding duty of her lineage and the desperate yearning for autonomy, she felt isolated, a solitary figure encircled by the specters of expectation and foreordained allegiance. This was a moment layered in cinematic mystery, a powerful tableau of a young woman standing on the precipice of her future, where every heartbeat was a battle cry against the forces that sought to bind her. In the deep stillness before the storm, Amara's journey was just beginning. The ritual had marked her forever, a luminous scar that both defined and confined her. And so, as the first rays of twilight painted the horizon in shades of hope and melancholy, she prepared to confront not only the legacy of the past, but also the turbulent, uncharted territories of her own soul. What lies ahead for Amara? Will she embrace the indomitable spirit within her, or will the chains of fate tighten their grip evermore? As the ceremonial grounds faded behind her, one thing became poignantly clear. Her story was a battle not just for control, but for the very soul of her identity, a story that would soon challenge the limits of destiny and the power of defiant love. Destiny and the mark. In the heart of the twilight gathering, the priestess emerged like a vision from a dream, a luminous figure draped in silver robes that cascaded with an ethereal glow. Her every step was measured, graceful, as if the very fabric of the universe bent to her will. With a calm and commanding voice, she addressed the assembly. Today, we come together to witness the sacred rite that reveals the one destined by fate. Her words, resonant and deep, wove through the charged air, drawing the attention of every onlooker, yet none as keen as Amara, who felt her pulse synchronize with the priestess's intonations. The priestess raised a mystical orb high above her head. Its surface shimmered with iridescent hues, a dazzling kaleidoscope of light that seemed to contain the essence of countless stars. The orb pulsed slowly, a heartbeat in itself, and with every rhythmic glow, the tension in the atmosphere deepened. Shadows danced across the stone floor, their movement echoing the quiet turmoil that churned inside Amara's soul. As the orb drew nearer, its energy grew palpable, an almost electric charge that prickled every fiber of her being. The closer the orb came to Amara, the more she could feel its latent power surging through the sacred space. The energy was not benign. It crackled in the air like a gathering storm, intensifying the connection between magic and destiny. In that instant, time seemed to pause, stretching each heartbeat into an eternity. A shiver ran down her spine, and with it came a flurry of sensations, a heady mix of burning heat and fierce, consuming cold that enveloped her very skin, as if she were being immersed in liquid fire. Then it happened. The orb, now close enough to touch, began to emit a brilliant, almost blinding light. Amara's eyes widened as the luminous glow surged across her arm, racing upward in a rush of excruciating energy. The sensation was like no other, a searing, fiery pain that both burned and awoke her at once. She felt the heat build gradually, intensifying until it felt as if tiny needles of flame were etching themselves into her flesh. Slowly, painfully, an intricate pattern took shape on her skin, a mark that resembled the delicate yet wild imprint of a wolf's paw. Its edges glowed with an unearthly radiance, pulsating in sync with her own heartbeat. At that exact, fateful moment, a single word escaped her lips, a broken, whispered "no" that echoed in the stillness of the ritual. It was not a full rejection, but rather a fragile murmur of defiance that rose from deep within her, betraying both her terror and her inner resolve. The word hung heavy in the air, a lone beacon of resistance against the inevitability unfolding around her. The physical sensations were overpowering. The burning mark sent waves of fiery agony through her body, leaving her trembling. Each pulse of pain was accompanied by a rush of adrenaline that stirred something within her, a spark of uncontrollable defiance that surged despite the searing sensation. The orb's energy, relentless and potent, seemed to forge a connection between her and a fate that had been determined long before she had a say in her own future. The mark, like an indelible brand of destiny, glowed with a life of its own on her skin, a symbol that now defined her in the eyes of all who had gathered. Yet amid the torrent of physical agony, a quiet, inner battle raged. Amara's mind, clouded by pain and shock, started to clear in ways that heralded a powerful internal metamorphosis. There was fear, naturally, a fear of this unyielding force that sought to bind her to a destiny she did not choose. But intertwined with that fear was an ember of rebellion, a fierce inner cry that echoed within her. I will not be this easily claimed. For a heartbeat, the searing pain became a touchstone for something more enduring than mere suffering. It was the moment when defiance was born, the painful acknowledgement of a destiny imposed upon her, and yet the undeniable stir of a free will that refused to be snuffed out. The ambiance shifted as the orb's light wavered, mingling with the shadows and casting an otherworldly glow over the stunned gathering. In that electrifying pause between pain and defiance, the priestess lowered the orb slowly, allowing the magic to subside into a haunting silence. The crowd's murmurs fell to a low hum as every eye fixated on the mark, a fiery glowing sigil that now burned on Amara's wrist. It was as though the very fabric of fate had been woven directly into her being, a permanent script etched by the ancient powers that govern this mystical rite. Amara's breath hitched as she stared at the radiant emblem, a stark reminder of the chain that destiny had fastened around her. In that bittersweet moment, as the lingering heat of the mark mingled with the chill of disbelief, she felt both an overwhelming sense of isolation and an incendiary surge of inner strength. The ritual had not just marked her body, it had ignited a battle within her soul. Even as the overwhelming pain threatened to engulf her, a determined whisper deep inside declared that this was merely the beginning of her journey, a journey to reclaim her freedom in a world that sought to bind her with unyielding chains. In the midst of the fading orb light and the dissipating magic, Amara stood on the precipice of a new, tumultuous life. Destiny and the mark, intertwined in that crucible of ritual fire, had forged not just a signal of submission, but a call to arms, a call to resist, to fight, and ultimately to transform that unchosen fate into her own path. And so, with the echo of that hesitant no still resonating in her heart, Amara's defiant spirit silently vowed that she would fight against the bonds of fate, no matter the cost. Chains of destiny. As the magical light of the orb faded into a shimmering afterglow, the murmurs of the gathered crowd swelled into a low, collective hum, a sound that seemed to carry centuries of tradition and the weight of the kingdom's expectations. In this charged silence, Amara's heart pounded painfully in her chest, echoing the rush of conflicting emotions that now surged through her. It was then that her father, King Arik, stepped forward. His formidable presence filled the space, his eyes dark and somber beneath the strain of unspoken regret. With each measured word, he declared the bond complete. His voice, resonant with authoritative command, yet soft with an undercurrent of guilt, cut through the still air. Behold, the bond is sealed. You are now bound to your fate, to King Arik, as destiny has decreed. Those words, spoken with the weight of royalty and the burden of ancient legacies, struck Amara like a physical blow. The crowd stirred restlessly, a mixture of awe and pity, shimmering in their eyes. Their whispers wove a tapestry of uneasy approval, a background murmur that seemed to underscore her isolation. In that long, breathless moment, her father's declaration was both an edict and a confession, a stark admission that this union was never born from her choice, but from an unyielding, predetermined fate. Amara's gaze dropped, and in the flickering light that danced across the marble floor, her trembling hands came into sharp focus. They were bound, and yet they yearned to be free, a silent, desperate plea etched in every subtle shake. Each quiver in her fingers told a story of the internal storm raging within. A potent cocktail of suffocating despair, seething anger, and the unyielding embers of defiance. The mark on her wrist, still aglow with the residual warmth of its fiery birth, pulsed steadily. A constant reminder of the chains that now linked her destiny to another. Inside, her mind was a tempest of thoughts. Every beat of her heart whispered a bitter truth. Her future had been sealed long before she had a voice in the matter. The sensation of being trapped in a role not chosen, a life dictated by the cold mechanics of destiny, was unbearable. With each passing second, the reality of the bond crystallized further, its implications burning into her soul like an indelible brand. The suffocating inevitability of her fate pressed in from all sides, and Amara felt the weight of every expectation, every unyielding tradition that had come to define her existence. A swirl of conflicting emotions churned within her. On one side, the raw, piercing pain of betrayal at the loss of her autonomy mingled with the bitter taste of defeat. On the other, a growing fire of resistance that refused to be quenched. It was a silent defiance that began in the quiet corners of her heart, a disdain, fierce determination that flared up with every reluctant word her father spoke. The authority of the king was undeniable, but the quiet guilt in his tone revealed that even he was not immune to the sorrow of unfulfilled hopes and forgotten dreams. It was as if, in his own way, he mourned the loss of a daughter's freedom for the sake of duty. As the murmurs of the crowd swelled and then ebbed again like the tide, Amara's internal battle intensified. She felt as though she was drowning in a sea of imposed fate, each word from her father, a weight pulling her further under. The realization dawned on her in stark, painful clarity. She was a pawn in a grander game, a piece moved by forces of tradition and power that cared little for the desires of the heart. The fire of her resistance grew steadily, illuminating the darkest recesses of her soul with a fierce promise of self-determination. In the solitude of that charged moment, as the echoes of her father's declaration reverberated like a distant drumbeat, Amara's inner voice rose up, clear and unyielding, piercing the oppressive haze of her despair. The tumult of suffocation and resignation began to give way to a steady, defiant resolve, a resolve that burned as brightly as the mark seared upon her skin. With a clarity born of both pain and sudden insight, she vowed to herself a promise that would carve a new path through the darkness. Amid the relentless din of expectations and the ghostly remnants of her father's final words, she made her silent declaration, "I won't be his." In that single, potent whisper, the storm within her stilled for a heartbeat. It was a vow that carried not only the weight of defiance, but also the hope of reclaiming her very soul. A promise that no matter how heavy the chains of destiny might seem, her spirit would forever strive to break free, to fight back against the imposed fate and forge her own way, no matter the cost. Words of command, words of rebellion. After the marking ceremony, the echo of ancient power still lingered in the air like a heavy, unyielding shroud. Amara, her body trembling with both physical pain and the inner turmoil that her fate had ignited, slipped away from the murmuring crowd. The corridors of the palace, dimly lit by the flickering torches that lined the ancient stone walls, became her solitary refuge. A narrow passageway, where the cacophony of destiny was replaced by the soft, haunting sounds of her own footsteps. Every stride she took reverberated with the weight of a destiny forced upon her, a grim reminder of the bond that had sealed her fate. Her mind swirled with a tumult of emotions, defiance burning fiercely alongside a rising desperation. In these moments of escape, the palace's cold, unyielding walls transformed into a labyrinth of isolation and reflection. The echoing corridors, filled with the hushed whispers of long-forgotten secrets, seemed to amplify her internal struggle. She could almost hear the faint voices of those who had come before her, their voices laden with despair and resignation, urging her to accept the path laid out for her. But deep within her, that solitary, resolute cry, "I won't be his," spurred her onward, even as doubt threatened to suffocate her spirit. At long last, she reached her private chambers, a space that had always been both a sanctuary and a prison. The heavy wooden door creaked open to reveal an austere room, its furnishings modest compared to the grandeur of the palace. Here, in the muted light, her parents awaited her, figures defined by the dual forces of duty and emotional sacrifice. Her father, King Arik, stood tall with a rigid posture that spoke of years spent upholding royal decrees without a second thought. His face, chiseled by duty and hardened by tradition, was set in an expression of cold authority, impervious and implacable. It was as though every wrinkle in his visage told the story of centuries-old expectations, each one a testament to the relentless burden of his kingdom's future. Beside him, her mother, Queen Seraphine, exuded a contrasting aura. There was an air of sorrow in her eyes, a quiet, melancholy understanding that transcended the strict confines of royal obligation. Her mother's expression was one of gentle empathy, mixed with a resigned acceptance of what must be done for the survival of their people. Yet, even in that sorrow, Amara could discern a deep, unspoken grief, a mourning for the daughter who was slowly being transformed from a free spirit into a symbol of destiny. As Amara entered, the tension in the safe room became almost palpable. The air was heavy with unspoken words and suppressed emotions. Her father's gaze, cold and unwavering, met hers with a weight that seemed to anchor her to an inevitable submission. His voice, low and commanding, broke the silence with words that carried both order and an underlying note of bitter regret. "You are bound by duty, Amara. There is no escaping the destiny that has been set for you." Each syllable was delivered with the precision of a monarch, a sentence spoken not merely to instruct but to condemn, locking her into a role predefined by tradition and the cruel hand of fate. Amara's heart pounded against the confines of her chest as she tried to muster the courage within her, her soul screaming against the suffocating certainty of her destiny. "But what of my choice?" she managed to cry out, her voice trembling, with a mix of defiance and vulnerability. Her words, though small, reverberated in the charged stillness of the room, challenging the authority that had been imposed upon her since birth. The question hung in the air like a fragile spark, a challenge to the rigid order that her father upheld. Her mother's eyes filled with an empathetic sorrow, a silent tear threatening to escape in the quiet of the chamber. "My dear, we have always followed the ways of our ancestors," she murmured softly, her voice a delicate whisper that belied the harshness of the decree. "This bond is not a choice, but a legacy, a sacred connection for the survival of our people." Even as her mother spoke, Amara could feel the overwhelming weight of duty pressing down on her, a crushing force that seemed to chisel away at the remnants of her individuality. In that fraught confrontation, the clash between imposed duty and the fierce desire for personal freedom was laid bare. The cold, imperious tone of her father's command mingled with the gentle, sorrowful cadence of her mother's acceptance, creating a dissonant symphony that only deepened Amara's internal conflict. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, not merely for the loss of choice, but for the realization that she had been reduced to a mere instrument, a pawn in a grand political game that cared little for the beating heart behind the mark. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of ancient incense, mingling with the cold, metallic tang of impending fate. Every sound, the crackle of a nearby torch, the measured ticking of a hidden clock, served as a stark reminder that time was slipping away, carrying with it the shreds of a life that might have been hers. In the midst of this oppressive tension, the stark dichotomy of command and rebellion illuminated every corner of the room. Yet, amid the overwhelming darkness of duty and despair, a spark of fire refused to be extinguished within Amara. In the silent chaos that enveloped her, that single, steady inner voice grew louder. With clenched fists and a heart-pounding defiance, she stared deep into the frigid eyes of her father and then into the sorrowful gaze of her mother. In a voice that trembled with a fierce, raw determination, she declared, "I won't be his." Those words, simple and unadorned, struck like a clarion call, a potent vow that echoed in the cavernous depths of her being. They carried the promise of an internal revolt, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to defy even the most insidious chains of fate. In that defining moment, the suffocating grip of destiny began to crack. Though her future had been sealed by ancient decrees and bound by the weight of tradition, Amara's rebellion was the first tremor in what might be a seismic shift, a promise that she would resist the role of a pawn and forge her own identity, regardless of the cost. On the run from fate, in the dead of night, as shadows stretched long across the palace corridors, Amara finally broke free of the suffocating confines of duty. Every step she took was deliberate yet hesitant, echoing in the silent passageways that once belonged to her family's legacy but had now become a prison of expectations. Her heart, heavy with oppression and a burgeoning need for freedom, pounded as if heralding each stolen moment of rebellion against a destiny she never chose. In her modest chamber, the weight of the marking ceremony still pressed down on her, like a relentless shroud. With trembling fingers, Amara packed a small bundle of essential belongings, a token of her former life and a precious reminder of who she aspired to be. Every item she carefully tucked away carried memories of both loss and hope, each one a silent vow that she would reclaim her identity, even if it meant walking away from everything that had been forced upon her. The act of packing itself felt like an elegy, a quiet farewell to the life scripted by fate. Every piece of clothing, every memento, was a symbol of the past she was desperate to escape. The oppressive heaviness in her heart grew with every item she placed into her bag, the bright light of freedom seeming ever more distant as the palace walls loomed like ancient sentinels guarding secrets of unyielding tradition. After what felt like an eternity of careful preparation and lingering doubt, Amara slipped out into the darkened corridors. The silence outside was absolute, yet laced with the distant hum of palace life continuing unabated. With each tentative step, her mind churned with an inner monologue, a torrent of questions and burning determination. Is this the life I'm meant to live? She wondered bitterly, her thoughts as tumultuous as the storm raging within her soul. Must I forever be shackled by the chains of destiny? The resolve to forge a different future began to crystallize inside her, driving her forward through the corridors that had witnessed generations of constrained loyalty. Outside, the night air was cool and liberating, a sharp contrast to the stifling confines of the palace. Amara approached the waiting carriage, its sleek form under the pale glow of the moon suggesting both escape and uncertainty. The carriage's horses snorted softly, as if sensing the gravity of her departure. Their eyes glinted with the promise of uncharted freedom. As she climbed inside, the world beyond the palace transformed before her eyes into a cinematic tapestry of rolling hills, quiet woods, and distant glimmering streams. Each sight and sound in the countryside whispered of a bittersweet reprieve, an embrace of nature's beauty, even as her heart remained troubled by the life forced upon her. Inside the carriage, the rhythmic creak of the wheels over cobblestone and the gentle rustling of the night breeze pressed in on her. It was here, in the intimate isolation of her escape, that Amara's internal turmoil became most vivid. In these precious moments, she felt the pang of guilt for abandoning her prescribed destiny, mingled with fierce relief at finally being untethered. Her mind roiled with thought. Was I ever truly free, or merely condemned to a future chosen by others? As the carriage rolled steadily forward, the stark beauty of the countryside offered momentary solace, a delicate balance of hope and grief dancing in the cool night air. Her eyes, intermittently drawn to the dark silhouette of the palace receding into the distance, reflected deep and restless questions. Each passing tree and rustling leaf seemed to echo the fragile nature of her rebellion, a living reminder that the world outside was both vast and mercilessly indifferent to her personal plight. Yet amid the scenic elegance, a hidden fire smoldered, a rising determination to break the unyielding chains of destiny, to chart her own course even if the way was unknown. As the carriage neared the towering, imposing gates of the palace, grand, fortified barrier symbolizing everything she was desperately trying to escape, Amara hesitated. The sight of those massive, unyielding gates, illuminated by the soft light of distant lanterns, stirred a storm of conflicting emotions within her. Here lay the very threshold of the life that had been forced upon her, a concrete reminder of all that she was meant to re-enter. For a breathless moment, she pressed her hand against the cool metal of the gate, feeling the cold solidity that represented fate's unrelenting hold. In that symbolic instant, the carriage slowed to a stop. The world outside seemed to hold its breath. With her heart pounding a furious cadence, Amara resolved in that charged moment, "I will not go back willingly." The palace, with its looming architecture and stifling traditions, was no longer a sanctuary, but a gilded cage. She resisted stepping forward, her inner monologue thundering with both fear and defiance. Just then, as if summoned by her inner resolve, the heavy gates creaked open, and in the dim light emerged King Arik himself, a figure of both undeniable power and ominous intent. His presence was commanding, radiating an aura of authority that both captivated and threatened her fragile sense of freedom. Standing before her, he was the personification of the fate she had always dreaded, and yet his arrival stirred the latent embers of her determination. In that charged, cinematic moment, as the carriage and the palace converged at fate's precipice, Amara's internal struggle crystallized into a silent vow, an unyielding promise that, no matter the cost, she would never let herself be bound by a destiny chosen for her. The conflict in her eyes spoke volumes, and as she prepared to confront the looming figure of Arik, her heart beat with the defiant whisper of rebellion. "I will find another way." Reluctant return. In the chill of early nightfall, the taste of fleeting freedom still clung to Amara like a bittersweet secret. But fate, relentless as ever, would not let her remain in escape for long. Almost as if guided by unseen coercive hands, palace guards emerged from the shadows, their stern faces illuminated by the waning moonlight. They approached with measured steps, their presence a cold reminder that even a stolen moment of liberty had its price. Despite the surge of defiance still burning within her, Amara's resistance faltered as the guards' firm grip and unyielding commands forced her back into the world she had so desperately tried to flee. Reluctantly, she allowed herself to be led, each step echoing through the vast, imposing corridors of the palace like a resounding decree of inevitability. The grand corridor loomed ahead, its vaulted ceilings and ornate tapestries serving as stark evidence of a legacy that had imprisoned her from birth. The cool stone beneath her feet, polished smooth by generations of tradition, now felt like cold chains closing around her ankles. Every footstep brought her closer to the very heart of the palace, where the oppressive weight of expectation waited with bated breath. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken judgment, and the faint murmur of assembled nobles, all their eyes fixed upon her as if she were a relic of fate rather than a living, breathing soul. Then came the invitation, a summons not delivered with the warmth of genuine concern, but rather with the chilling command of authoritarian decree. In the midst of her retreat, a herald, voice as crisp as winter's wind, announced that King Arik demanded her presence at dinner that very night. The words resonated with a duality that was impossible to ignore. They held both the unmistakable tone of coercion and a haunting undercurrent of care. It was as if the summons was meant not only to recall her to the duties of her predetermined role, but also to remind her of a bond that remained unbroken, even as it chafed against her desire for freedom. Reluctantly, she was escorted toward the grand dining hall, a vast space draped with the heavy trappings of royal opulence, yet suffused with an unsettling air of menace. The corridor leading to the hall was dimly lit, every step marked by the slow, deliberate rhythm of ancient stone and whispered sighs of the past. Here, the grandeur of the palace was inescapable. High ceilings stretched upward into darkness, and grand, intricately carved pillars seemed to bear the burden of unyielding tradition. The oppressive energy of the space seeped into her bones, leaving little doubt that control was never far behind. Inside the dining hall, an air of forced celebration greeted her, a dissonant blend of polished silverware, murmurs of polite expectation, and an underlying tension that vibrated like a plucked string. King Arik stood near the head of the table, his gaze both commanding and unreadable. His presence dominated the room, and yet there was an ineffable quality about the way he looked at her, a mingling of possession and something that resembled care. It was a look that repulsed her as much as it captivated her, a duality that stirred in the recesses of her conflicted heart. Every movement in that hall was choreographed to assert control. The clink of polished china, the rustle of luxurious fabric, and the measured tone of every word spoken among the courtiers reminded her that here, in this gilded cage, she was nothing more than a symbol of her bond with Arik, a pawn in a game ruled by ancient decree. Yet, under the glare of such overwhelming authority, Amara's inner defiance smoldered quietly. Her eyes, though veiled in a mask of forced resignation, betrayed a tempest of emotions: anger, sorrow, and the flickering embers of rebellion. Arik's invitation to dinner was laced with contradictions. His tone, though rigid and coerce, held moments of unexpected tenderness. A brief tilt of his head, a softening in the cut of his gaze that hinted at the possibility of genuine care beneath his iron exterior. And yet, every time those fleeting moments appeared, the relentless grip of control would snap back, reminding her of the reality she could not escape. The balance between duty and desire was an impossible equation, a constant tug-of-war between what was imposed upon her and what she yearned for with every fiber of her being. As the evening unfolded, Amara found herself drawn deeper into a performance she had long resented. Her presence at the table, despite her internal protests, became a silent battleground. Every courteous nod, every polite smile, was a mask that barely concealed the storm raging beneath. The sumptuous surroundings, designed to evoke a sense of security and continuity, instead underscored the stark reality of her captivity. Here, amid the opulent dishware and gilded decorations, her soul ached for true liberation, a release from the invisible chains that had been forged by fate. The night deepened, and as the dinner drew to a tense close, Amara stood once more at the threshold between worlds. Outside, the palace gates loomed, dark and imposing, a constant reminder of what she was forced to re-enter. In that final liminal moment, she hesitated, her eyes fixated on the familiar yet despised silhouette of the grand entrance. The uncertainty in her heart was palpable as she grappled with the dual forces of repulsion and inexplicable attraction toward King Arik. His presence, both oppressive and magnetic, left her questioning whether the man who bound her fate could ever truly be free of the chains he himself had forged. And so, with the echoes of coercive commands and haunting hints of care still resonating in her mind, Amara took a slow, uncertain step toward the palace gates, her body tense with trepidation and defiance. The night was far from over, and the journey ahead promised even more intricate battles between duty and desire. For now, she stood on the precipice of another chapter in her life, a forced reunion that felt as much like a surrender as it did a call to arms against a destiny that refused to fade quietly into oblivion. The weight of the mark. In the quiet solitude of her lavish yet confining chamber, Amara sank onto a velvet chaise longue, her body heavy with a tumultuous blend of fear, anger, and a distant yet persistent spark of hope. The opulent room, adorned with rich tapestries and gilded fixtures, felt simultaneously like a sanctuary and a prison, a gilded cage where every luxurious detail served as a reminder of the fate that had been forced upon her. The soft glow of candlelight danced on the walls, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to echo the deep conflict raging within her soul. Amara's gaze fell upon the glowing mark on her wrist, a searing imprint that burned like a wildfire across her skin. To her, it was more than just a symbol of destiny. It was a relentless chain, a constant, fiery reminder that her life was no longer her own. As she traced the intricate pattern with trembling fingertips, she imagined it as molten iron forged in a crucible of fate, a heavy shackle meant to bind her to a predetermined path. Each pulse from the mark mirrored the rapid thudding of her heart, a painful rhythm that underscored every moment of her internal struggle. Her mind became a storm of questions and bitter realizations. What does this bond truly mean for my freedom? She wondered silently. Am I doomed to a life dictated by ancient decrees and unyielding duty, or is there a chance, however slim, to reclaim the spark of my own will? The fire of the mark, though maddeningly intense, seemed to flicker with an almost defiant light, as if challenging the oppressive chains it represented. In that moment, the mark transformed in her eyes from an instrument of control into a symbol of resistance, an ember of rebellion waiting to ignite a revolution within her soul. The sumptuous aroma of burning wax mingled with the faint, melancholic notes of distant music from the palace halls, and in that sensory haze, Amara's inner monologue deepened. I am both victim and warrior, she reflected, her thoughts racing as vehemently as her heart. Every touch of this mark is a reminder of what they have forced upon me, a destiny sealed with icy certainty. Yet within that cruel imprint, there burns the potential for change, for defiance, a spark that could set my soul ablaze with newfound strength. The duality of her fate tormented her, contrasting the exquisite beauty of her surroundings with the harsh reality of a life not chosen. Her anguish painted the air around her in shades of darkness, yet even in those depths, a tiny, hopeful glow began to emerge. She recalled the moment when the mark first flared into life, the shock of heat, the overwhelming pain, and how, despite everything, she had whispered a single word of protest. No. It was a fragile, almost inaudible utterance, yet in its sound lay the first seeds of rebellion. Now, as she sat enveloped in solitude, the memory of that defiant murmur resonated through her, growing louder with each passing beat. It reminded her that deep within, beneath the layers of fear and despair, she possessed a fierce will, an inner flame that refused to be smothered by the weight of a destiny not her own. In the stillness of her chamber, the world outside seemed to fade into insignificance. The only sound was the soft, steady tick of a distant clock, a reminder that time was both her enemy and her ally. Every tick was a heartbeat, every talk, a moment of potential rebellion against the chains that bound her. The silence around her was profound, pressing in from all sides as if demanding that she choose whether to succumb to fate or to rise against it. And in that heavy pause, Amara's eyes glistened with unspoken determination. Her thoughts turned to the future, a future that could be unshackled from the oppressive bonds imposed by others. I will find a way to use this mark, this fire coursing, through my veins, not as a symbol of my subjugation, but as the spark of a revolution. She vowed, her inner voice rising like a clarion call amid the oppressive silence. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. Despite the searing pain and the heavy burden of expectation, there was a new path, a path carved by resilience, where defiance was not an act of rebellion against fate, but a claim to her own destiny. As the night deepened, so did the intensity of her introspection. Amara closed her eyes, allowing herself a brief moment of vulnerability, where raw emotion mingled with the quiet strength that had begun to bloom within her. She visualized the mark as a burning brand, a symbol of control that she could one day overthrow. That internal moment of clarity was like a break in a dark storm cloud, a glimpse of sunlight that pierced through the gloom with promises of emancipation. In this delicate interplay of pain and hope, Amara's inner turmoil transformed, into a powerful resolve. The mark, with all its searing intensity, was no longer merely an emblem of surrender, but the very catalyst for her internal rebellion. In the isolation of her lavish chamber, amid the echoes of her own heavy breathing and the gentle crackle of the fire, she made a silent, profound commitment to herself. The whisper of her heart, quiet yet insistent, declared that despite the chains of fate, she would not be reduced to a mere puppet. Amara opened her eyes, and in that reflective gaze lay the beginning of a defiant spark. It was the seed of rebellion that promised that her destiny, though forcefully marked, might one day be rewritten by the sheer force of her will. And with that haunting, undeniable truth, she silently vowed, "I will reclaim my freedom. I will not be chained by fate." Breaking the chains, in the dim light of King Arik's study, the tension was palpable. A charged silence that vibrated with the promise of a long-awaited confrontation. The room, draped in heavy velvet and lined with ancient scrolls, seemed to shrink under the weight of unspoken truths. Amara stood before him, her eyes aflame with raw defiance and pain, her clenched fists visible in the flickering candlelight. It was here, in this sanctum of authority and tradition, that she finally found the courage to break the silence that had bound her for so long. Arik, seated at his massive wooden desk, exuded an aura of cold command. His gaze was as unyielding as the stone walls surrounding them, yet behind that hardened exterior, one could almost glimpse the scars of a man burdened by duty and the relentless pursuit of power. His eyes narrowed as he met Amara's penetrating stare, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with the electricity of years of repression and anger. "What is it that you wish to say, Amara?" he asked, his voice measured, yet edged with impatience. There was little warmth in his tone, only the distant echo of a king who had long forgotten the language of tenderness. Her heart pounded in her ears, the sound merging with the steady, slow tick of an ancient clock in the far corner of the room. For a heartbeat, Amara's defiant resolve trembled like a flickering flame in the wind. Then, with a voice that resonated through the hushed study, she spoke. "I need to know if you value me as more than your possession, if you see me as your equal, or if I am to forever be nothing more than a tool in your grand design, the sign." Words hung in the air like a challenge, and Arik's expression darkened. He slammed his fist on the desk, a violent punctuation that sent ripples through the stillness. "Don't you dare speak to me in that tone," he snarled. "I have built this kingdom on strength and unyielding authority. I control every facet of it, and so too you are bound by that order." Amara's eyes blazed as she took a defiant step forward. "Controlling me does not grant you the right to erase who I am. I am not a commodity, nor can I be measured by the power you command. I am my own person, with hopes, dreams, and a spirit that refuses to be contained by your decrees." Their voices clashed in rapid, heated exchanges, a rapid back-and-forth dialogue that reverberated with both fury and vulnerability. Each word was laced with decades of unspoken grievances, each sentence a battleground where the forces of authority and rebellion collided. The cinematic close-ups of their faces revealed every detail. The tightening of Arik's jaw, the fierce glint in Amara's eyes, the tremor in her outstretched hand as she dared to challenge him. Arik rose from his seat, slowly closing the distance between them. His steps were measured, his presence overwhelming. It was as if the very room was bending under his imposing aura. "You think you can defy me?" he hissed, his voice a mix of disbelief and seething rage. "I am the king. I am the order and the power that binds this realm. Without that, what have you left? A broken ideal? A wandering shadow?" Amara's defiance hardened into determination. "I have lost my identity in the chains you forged," she retorted, her voice trembling only with the intensity of her passion. "This bond, this mark, they have not made me less. They have merely shown me the weight of a fate I never chose. I will not be defined by your legacy of control any longer." Her words, desperate yet resolute, seemed to slice through the tension like a blade. As she spoke, her eyes locked with his, challenging him to see beyond the veneer of power. For a suspended moment, the study felt as though time itself held its breath, caught between the collapse of old orders and the birth of something new, something fiercely liberating. Arik's expression wavered momentarily, a flicker of something, unrecognizable, perhaps doubt or regret, darting in his eyes before he masked it once again with a hardened scowl. The air in the room thickened further, filled with a sense of impending transformation, as if this confrontation could shatter the very chains that had long imprisoned them both. With the intensity of her inner revolution shining through every word, Amara took one final defiant step forward. "No more," she declared, her voice rising above the oppressive silence. "I will no longer be tethered to a destiny you dictate. I refuse to be controlled, to be reduced to a symbol of your power. I am more than this mark, more than the bond sealed upon my flesh. I am my own, and I will forge my own path." In that moment, the air seemed to tremble with the weight of her vow, a promise that reverberated not only within the walls of that ancient study, but within the very core of her being. The chains of fate, once thought invincible, now felt brittle before the force of her burgeoning independence. And as the echoes of her declaration faded into a heavy, charged silence, the stage was set for a new chapter, a fierce internal battle, and an external revolution that would reshape the very foundations of their shared destiny. Shattered peace and lingering despair. In the wake of the explosive confrontation, a deafening silence swallowed the study. The clash of voices faded into echoing memories, leaving only a heavy stillness that pressed in from every corner. Amara stood alone amidst the charged air, her defiant words now mere whispers in her mind, as if the very sound of her resolve had been choked off by the weight of their exchange. The charged silence seemed to fracture the room into shards of unspoken regret and bitter isolation, and with it, the peace she had once hoped for was shattered. Stumbling away from the study as if guided by instinct rather than choice, Amara sought refuge in the labyrinthine corridors of the palace. Each step felt both liberating and crushing. The hurried patter of her bare feet against cold, unyielding stone echoing like a forlorn heartbeat. The closer she moved to the outer reaches of the palace, the more each footfall reminded her of the reality she now faced. A life marked by power, control, and the heavy chains of destiny. Her every moment was draped in a solitude that cut deeper than any spoken word. Inside the dim, chilly confines of her own chamber, Amara collapsed onto a hard, unadorned wooden chair. The warmth of the golden light outside had vanished, replaced by a stark, unforgiving shadow that engulfed the room. It was a small, barren space, a poignant contrast to the opulence of the palace's grand halls. And yet in this isolation, every whisper of the past seemed to reverberate with piercing clarity. Here, in the quiet suffocation of her personal retreat, she replayed every harsh word spoken during the confrontation with King Arik, like a relentless, looping incantation. Her inner monologue was unkind and merciless. "I am nothing but a pawn," she thought bitterly, the words burning across her mind like scorching embers. The cold, hard silence in the room magnified the sting of each syllable, the relentless echo of her father's command, the biting tone of her mother's resigned lament, and even the ironclad pronouncement of her defiance. Every harsh phrase, every command carved into her memory, looped over and over, until it became a symphony of despair. With each replay, she felt her isolation deepen, as if the heavy chains of fate were not only binding her body, but also imprisoning her soul. As she sat there, the stark contrasts of her surroundings began to mirror the turbulence within. The chamber was dimly lit, the feeble light from a single flickering candle casting long, quivering shadows on the cold stone walls. Outside this small sanctuary, the palace was a fortress of tradition and power, a place of exuberant celebrations and commanding authority. But here, in the silence of solitude, the room felt as though it were made of ice, its chill seeping into her bones, reinforcing the loneliness that gnawed at her heart. Amara's thoughts swirled chaotically, a tempest of regret, anger, and a deep, unyielding despair. She questioned the cruel irony of her existence, a life dictated by forces beyond her control, where every chance at liberation was smothered by expectations. Am I ever truly free? She pondered, her eyes narrowing as if trying to see a way out of the darkness that surrounded her. The ghost of that defiant "no" she had once whispered still lingered, but now it was muffled under the endless weight of obligation and sorrow. In the quiet, the distant sounds of palace life, barely audible footsteps in the corridor, a distant clink of armor, served as harsh reminders that the world outside her room was still governed by a relentless order. Yet, even as she was enveloped by the cold, relentless solitude, there was a part of her soul that clung to a fragile hope. It was a spark, faint yet persistent, that whispered about the possibility of change, a chance that perhaps the bonds she bore did not have to be her eternal prison. This internal battle, fierce and unyielding, made her feel as though she were split in two. One part desperate to break free, the other sinking further into despair with every passing moment. In this moment of crushing isolation, she replayed the night's events as if they were etched in the very fabric of her skin, each memory leaving a scar that both reminded her of her defiance and bound her ever tighter to a destiny she never chose. And now, in that dim, frigid sanctuary of her own making, Amara's eyes filled with a haze of unshed tears. Each droplet of salt seemed to be a fragment of her soul slowly breaking apart. The silence was oppressive, a reminder not only of what had been lost, but of what might never be reclaimed. With her heart aching in her chest and a profound emptiness echoing in her mind, she was left with one final, lingering question that cut through the darkness like a desperate plea. Can I ever break free from these chains, or am I destined to remain trapped in this relentless cycle of fate and despair? The spark of resistance, in the cold aftermath of shattered peace and lingering despair, Amara found herself at a crossroads. Secluded in the quiet solitude of her private chamber, the memory of harsh words and oppressive mandates still burned, like cold embers on her skin. Yet amid the overwhelming darkness, a small spark of defiance began to flicker within her, a spark that promised the possibility of a future forged by her own hands. As the night deepened, Amara slowly rose from the hardness of her chair. Her once trembling hands now moved with purpose, though the scars of the past still tingled where the mark had been seared. Every step she took felt weighted by the burden of fate, but it was as if the silent rhythm of her heartbeat whispered, a resolute mantra, I am more than my destiny. With this newfound clarity, she began to plan her next moves, meticulously gathering her thoughts, as if assembling pieces of an intricate puzzle that would ultimately redefine her existence. In the dim, secretive light of an adjacent antechamber, Amara sought the counsel of her most trusted confidant, Tessa. Tessa, with her steady gaze and empathetic understanding, had witnessed every shift in Amara's turbulent journey. The room exuded an aura of quiet rebellion. Walls that had known the weight of unspoken sorrow now resonated with the promise of a daring new chapter. Amara, Tessa began softly, her voice a soothing counterpoint to the chaos that had once filled the corridors of the palace. I know, you are hurting. But remember, true strength is not found in submission. It is forged in adversity, in resistance. You must find balance between your inner fire and a strategy that can outwit the forces that bind you. Amara listened intently, her mind racing with images of her past, present, and an uncertain future. What new path will I forge? She murmured, her voice laced with both curiosity and apprehension. Can I outsmart the forces of fate that insist on locking me into a life I never chose? Her eyes burned with the reflection of defiant hope, even as doubt lingered at the edges of her thoughts. Tessa stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on Amara's shoulder, a silent gesture of support and solidarity. You have already taken the first step by declaring your defiance, by saying those words that broke the chains of your imposed destiny. Now, you must channel that spark into concrete action. Every strategy begins with a single idea, a small flicker that, if nurtured, can ignite an inferno of change. The room fell into a contemplative silence, broken only by the soft rustle of fabric and the distant echo of palace life outside. Amara's mind was a maelstrom of emotions, memories of being confined within gilded walls, of struggling under the weight of expectations, mingled with the tantalizing promise of liberation. Every recollection was both a wound and a lesson, a reminder of the power that came from resilience. Listen, Tessa continued, her tone measured and firm. The path ahead will be fraught with challenges. The forces that seek to control you are ancient and formidable, yet within you lies a fire that they cannot extinguish. You must harness that fire. Craft your plans not only as acts of defiance, but as calculated moves that will weaken the grip of fate over your life. Amara's heart pounded with a renewed determination. The idea of taking control, of rewriting the script of her destiny, resonated deep within her. I must act, she whispered, her voice echoing softly in the near darkness. If I do nothing, I will remain a pawn, forever chained by the choices of those before me. Her words, though gentle, carried the weight of absolute resolve. Her eyes drifted to the small, hidden window that looked out upon the night, a view of the starlit sky, vast and filled with possibilities. In that quiet moment, the palace's impenetrable walls seemed to recede, replaced by an expanse of mystery and potential. Every star that glittered in the sky was a silent question. Is there another way? Can I be the architect of my own future? These questions circled in her mind, each one igniting a spark that slowly coalesced into a blazing determination. With a deep breath, Amara stood tall, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of distant moonlight. I will not be defined by the chains of fate, she declared with steely conviction. I am determined to break free, to carve my own path, even if the road is perilous and uncertain. Her internal vow crystallized into a promise that would forever echo in the chambers of her soul, a promise to challenge every dictate imposed upon her, to rise each time she fell, and to fight for the freedom of her spirit. In that pivotal moment, Amara embraced not only her defiant spirit, but the strategic wisdom of her trusted ally. The spark of resistance that had been kindled in the darkness now burned bright, its flames fanning into a raging, unyielding fire. Her resolve was not merely an act of rebellion, it was the foundation upon which she would build her future. And with that daring determination, she prepared herself to confront her destiny head-on, ready to rewrite the story that had been imposed upon her for far too long. Stepping into the light, the heavy oak door to the palace's council room groaned open, releasing Amara into a space awash with both tradition and tension. The expansive hall, its high vaulted ceilings adorned with intricate frescoes depicting ancient battles and timeless legends, thrummed with the hushed murmur of courtiers and rival alphas. Every corner of the room, from the gleaming marble floor to the walls lined with ancestral portraits, spoke of unyielding power, a power that for generations had been monopolized by those who ruled without challenge. Yet today, the air itself seemed to shift, as if the very atmosphere was poised for change. In the center of this imposing chamber, Amara stood tall before an assembly of venerable advisors and battle-hardened alpha leaders. Their eyes, skeptical and calculating, fixed upon her as she surveyed the room with measured confidence. Gone was the timid whisper of a pawn. In her place, a presence had emerged, one that radiated both determination and a strategic vision that was as clear as it was bold. With a deep, steadying breath, Amara began her address. Esteemed advisors, honored alphas, she spoke, her voice resonant and unwavering. We stand at the crossroads of our kingdom's destiny. For too long, our strength has been measured solely in might and bloodshed. But true power, the power to endure and to prosper, lies in unity, strategy, and the wisdom to forge alliances, even when the odds seem insurmountable. Each word was delivered with calm authority, and as she continued, the room fell into a tense, expectant silence. Her eyes swept over the assembly, capturing the flicker of surprise in some, the hardened skepticism in others. Yet, with every measured pause, she carefully allowed her words to settle into the minds of those present. Our rivals seek to sow discord, to divide us with threats and empty promises, she continued, her tone rising with a quiet, simmering intensity. We have weathered many storms. Our shared struggles have shown that our true strength is not just in our ability to fight, but in our capacity to cooperate, to negotiate, and to strategize for a future that benefits all. Outside, the sounds of distant conflict and the soft murmurs of palace life faded into insignificance as her internal conviction fueled her eloquence. In that cinematic moment, every individual in the room seemed to be transported into the heart of her vision, the possibility of a united front built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Her words were not merely rhetoric. They were a declaration of intent, a call to arms against the forces of division that had long held sway over their destiny. As Amara laid out her strategic plan, she skillfully touched upon the delicate balance of power and responsibility. We must not rely solely on brute force, she asserted, but also invest in the innovation of alliances, in the nurturance of trade, and in the forging of new bonds that are as resilient as they are flexible. Let this ceasefire be not a fleeting truce, but a testament to what we can achieve when we stand together, not as isolated forces, but as a single, united power. Her words flowed like a carefully orchestrated symphony, a blend of visionary ambition and pragmatic resolve, punctuated by the promise of a future where their collective strength would override the specter of rivalry. For a long, heart-stopping moment, the tension in the council room was almost unbearable. The skeptical murmurs that had filled the room at the outset now gave way to a charged expectancy, as if every listener was holding their breath. In a breakthrough that sent a ripple of transformation through the assembly, King Arik stepped forward. His once cold, imperious gaze softened ever so slightly as he nodded approvingly at Amara's impassioned declaration. The palpable shift in his demeanor signified an acknowledgement, however subtle, that the young woman before him was indeed a force to be reckoned with. Arik's quiet approval, delivered with a measured nod and a glance that spoke volumes, cut through the remaining doubts in the hall. It was a powerful moment, one that not only broke through the walls of skepticism, but also heralded the beginning of an emerging partnership between two leaders, once divided by control and defiance. The room, now charged with a renewed sense of unity and the promise of tempered collaboration, fell into a silence that was at once both hopeful and resolute. As the meeting drew to a close, the tentative ceasefire that Amara had fought so hard to secure seemed more than just a temporary truce. It was a step toward a new era. With her strategic vision clearly laid out, and a spark of newfound recognition in King Arik's eyes, the council room became a crucible for change. The journey ahead was fraught with challenges, the road uncertain, and the stakes higher than ever. Yet, in that moment, Amara stood as the embodiment of emerging leadership and defiant determination, ready to steer the kingdom toward a future where unity and strength were redefined. Stepping away from the grand table, Amara's heart beat with both anticipation and a hint of trepidation. Her voice had resonated through the chamber, and now, as the echoes of her words mingled with the subdued applause, she felt the first true glimmer of a partnership, one that promised to transform not only the destiny of the kingdom, but also the very essence of her role within it. The uncertainty of tomorrow loomed large, but her resolve had shined through, marking the beginning of a new, united chapter in their shared journey. From control to unity. In the quiet aftermath of decisive change, the palace corridors that had long echoed with Arik's iron command now murmured with a tentative promise of transformation. In a secluded section of the Grand Royal Chamber, Amara and Arik found themselves alone together, the usual tension in the air replaced by a charged, fragile stillness, a prelude to an emotional breakthrough that would redefine their very relationship. Arik's once imposing figure, always cloaked in the shroud of uncontested authority, now seemed softened by the vulnerable weight of his past actions. His eyes, which had never before betrayed a hint of doubt, now held a quiet intensity as he looked at Amara. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, thick and palpable, as if it could bridge the chasm that had long separated them. Finally, Arik broke the silence, his voice lower and uncharacteristically tentative. Amara, I have spent my life believing that control was the only way to ensure the strength and survival of our kingdom. But listening to you today, witnessing your resolve, there is something different in you. Something that makes me question the very foundation of what I have always known. His words, though few, carried a burden of emerging vulnerability that contrasted starkly with his customary tone of absolute command. Amara regarded him, her eyes reflecting both cautious hope and lingering scars from past wounds. I have felt confined, reduced to a symbol of power rather than a living, breathing person with my own vision and desires, she replied softly, her voice steady, yet imbued with a raw edge that belied the years of pent-up defiance. I have long yearned not to be a tool in your arsenal, but a partner who shares both the burdens and the victories of our rule. Their dialogue unfolded slowly, each word measured, as if they were both afraid that one wrong note might shatter this newfound understanding. Arik's jaw tightened momentarily, a reflex of his old self, before he let his eyes drift, lost in the gravity of their mutual confession. I have always been taught that absolute power demands absolute control, he murmured, his voice laden with conflicted emotion. For years, I believed that embracing vulnerability would be a weakness. But today, I see a different kind of strength in you. A strength that challenges me to reconsider, to believe that true power might lie not in domination, but in unity. Amara took a deliberate step closer. The flickering candlelight danced softly on her determined face, highlighting the firmness in her gaze. Our kingdom deserves leaders who are unafraid to listen, to share the weight of the throne, she said firmly. I believe that by combining your wisdom with my vision, we can build a future that is greater than either of us alone. I do not wish to see you falter, nor do I wish to diminish your power. Rather, I want us to grow together, to support one another as equals. The dialogue wove a delicate tapestry of vulnerability and resolve. For a moment, the fierce persona of King Arik, known for his unyielding iron fist, seemed to dissolve into a more human figure, one burdened by the pain of his own regrets and the quiet yearning for change. His typically sharp voice softened further as he continued, "It is not easy, Amara. I fear that if I release my hold too much, the very fabric of our realm might tear. Yet the cost of holding on too tightly has proven to be a heavy price, a price that burdens my soul." The air around them shimmered with the weight of old wounds and the promise of healing. Amara reached out slowly, her hand hovering for a heartbeat before gently touching his. In that quiet contact, a world of unspoken understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the pain they had endured and the shared desire to forge a new path. "We need not risk tearing our kingdom apart by clinging to the past," she whispered, her voice both tender and resolute. "We can learn to balance our strengths, to lean on one another without compromising who we are." Arik's eyes glistened for a long moment, the cold veneer of his dominance cracking ever so slightly. "Perhaps," he conceded with a sigh that seemed to carry years of internal struggle. Perhaps there is a way to share this burden, to rule together not as master and subject, but as partners who understand that our individual strengths only multiply when united. In that profound instant, the transformation was palpable, a symbolic passage from the era of unilateral control to a new dawn of shared leadership. Each gaze, each whispered word, wove together a fragile promise of equality. The once dominating king and his defiant mate now stood side by side, their resolve mingling with the soft vulnerability of trust. The silence that fell between them was no longer oppressive. It was filled with possibilities, a quiet promise that echoed in the heart of the palace itself. As they slowly withdrew from their intimate conversation, they exchanged a final, powerful glance, a look laden with the quiet certainty of the future they hoped to build together. In that symbolic moment, as the candlelight flickered and cast long shadows upon the ancient stone, Arik reached out and gently squeezed Amara's hand. The gesture, simple yet profound, sealed a promise of unity, a promise that, together, they would guide their people towards a future that celebrated strength through shared purpose. And with that, a new chapter began, one in which the chains of old control were slowly being replaced by bonds of mutual respect, where the harsh divisions of the past began to give way to the gentle light of unity, the crown of equality. The day had dawned with a quiet promise, but nothing could have prepared Amara for the magnitude of what was to come. As the palace gates opened to reveal a procession of dignitaries and nobles in solemn reverence, the coronation hall emerged, a magnificent chamber where every pillar and tapestry whispered of ancient power and timeless legacy. The air was thick with the scent of burning incense and rose petals, a heady mixture that both celebrated and confined the grand spectacle. Inside, the hall was a grand theater of light and shadow. Massive chandeliers suspended from an intricately painted ceiling cast a warm glow that danced upon polished marble floors, creating a chiaroscuro effect that seemed to capture both the beauty and the weight of history. The noble assembly sat in hushed anticipation, their eyes fixed on the raised dais where the crown, resplendent with gemstones and bathed in a celestial light, awaited its destiny. Amara stood at the threshold, her heart caught in a tumultuous rhythm as memories of defiance and pain merged with the overwhelming gravity of the moment. Though the sumptuous setting was undeniably breathtaking, a dazzling interplay of gold and crimson draperies, the soft murmur of awe from every corner of the chamber, it felt as though the opulence was also a gilded cage, a physical manifestation of the legacy that had long dictated her fate. The weight of tradition bore down on her shoulders, and for a fleeting moment, every eye in the hall, every unspoken expectation, pressed into her like a vice. King Arik, the architect of the kingdom's iron rule, stepped forward with a gravity that silenced the last remnants of murmured skepticism. His presence, usually so unyielding, now carried a subtle warmth that belied his notorious reputation. In a solemn, almost ritualistic motion, he lifted the ornate crown, a symbol of absolute sovereignty, resplendent with intricate designs that sparkled like captured starlight. The crown was heavy, not just in physical weight, but in the legacy it represented, a binding token of destiny and power. With deliberate care, Arik extended the crown toward Amara, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that conveyed both challenge and concession. The symbolic passing of the crown was more than a mere transfer of regalia. It was a moment of transformation, a tangible severing of the old bonds of control in favor of a partnership based on mutual respect and shared leadership. As the crown rested momentarily in Amara's outstretched hand, she felt a shiver of cold, resolve run through her, an electric connection linking her with an uncertain future. Its metallic weight pressed firmly against her palm, a constant reminder of the responsibilities, the sacrifices, and the intricate destiny she was about to embrace. Every detail of the crown, the delicate filigree, the gleam of ruby and sapphire, and the subtle engraving that told tales of past rulers, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. It was as if the crown, forged in the crucible of centuries, had selected her as its bearer. The moment was charged, cinematic in its intensity, as if the universe itself had paused to witness a profound shift. In that heart-stopping instant, Amara felt the convergence of fate and free will, a collision of the legacy imposed on her and the strength burning fiercely within her. The crown was not a symbol of her subjugation. It was a mantle of power that she would redefine on her own terms. As Amara slowly settled the crown upon her head, a hush fell over the assembly. A collective breath held in anticipation of the new era about to be ushered in. The brilliant light overhead shone down, illuminating the intricate crown and casting a radiant glow upon her determined face. In that moment, she stood as the embodiment of transformation, a figure both refined by hardship and resolute in her quest for equality. With every fiber of her being, Amara understood that her reign would be defined not by the relentless accumulation of power, but by the art of uniting a fractured kingdom. Gathering her voice, now both gentle and commanding, she addressed the entire hall. Today, we stand at the threshold of a new age, not one born out of force or control, but out of shared vision and a commitment to unity. Our strength lies not in our division, but in our ability to come together as one, an empire where every voice, every soul, is cherished and empowered. Her words echoed through the vast chamber, merging with the soft rustle of silken robes and the steady beating of countless hearts. The nobles and advisors, once steeped in doubt, now found themselves drawn to the compelling hope in her speech. And as the coronation reached its zenith, the symbolic crown that had once represented an unyielding past now shone as a beacon of a united future. In that defining, stirring moment, Amara sealed her promise to forge a path of collaboration, forever altering the destiny of her kingdom and asserting that true power is shared and lived, not imposed and endured. Shadows of the past, hopes for tomorrow. After the grand coronation, when the last echoes of applause faded into a reverent silence, both Amara and Arik retreated into their private chambers. In the dim twilight that seeped through the high, narrow windows, the splendor and ceremony of the day gave way to a quieter, more introspective atmosphere, a space where old wounds and new understandings intertwined like shifting shadows on ancient walls. Alone in her chamber, Amara felt the cool tendrils of solitude wrap around her like a familiar if unwelcome cloak. The weight of the crown and the fresh responsibility of being declared queen still burned at the back of her neck, a constant reminder of both her new role and the legacy imposed upon her. Yet, as she sat by the window, gazing out at the vast expanse of the palace gardens shrouded in gentle darkness, her thoughts wandered to the price of power. Am I losing a piece of who I am in the pursuit of this throne? The question echoed in her mind with a painful persistence. Across the palace, in a room that held its own secrets of the past, King Arik sat alone by the flickering light of a solitary candle. The celebrations of the day had long since ceased, leaving him with only the heavy silence of his thoughts. His once unassailable persona now bore the crack of uncertainty, and his gaze, often so cold and fixed, now shifted restlessly over a collection of battle-worn scrolls and maps. Is this new partnership the beginning of a better future, or will I, too, be enslaved by old habits of control? He wondered, feeling the familiar tug of authority warring with a new desire to let go, a desire that both frightened and intrigued him. Late into the night, fate orchestrated an unforeseen convergence. By chance, or perhaps by the soft design of destiny itself, Amara and Arik's paths intersected in a quiet corridor that connected their chambers. In the stillness, there was no pomp, no public expectation, only the raw, unadorned truth of two souls laid bare by the day's events. Amara's eyes, still glistening with unshed tears of both relief and sorrow, met Arik's somber gaze. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. Arik, Amara began, her voice low and tremulous yet resolute. I fear that in accepting this crown, I have allowed the chains of expectation to tighten around me. I worry that the person I was is slowly being eclipsed by the role they demand I play. Her words were both an admission of vulnerability and a daring declaration of self-worth, spoken in a tone that balanced fragility with defiant determination. Arik's expression softened for a heartbeat before his resolve resurfaced. I too grapple with these shadows, he admitted in a rare moment of candidness. Every decision I make in the name of our kingdom feels like a step further into the habits that I once vowed to leave behind. Yet the responsibility, the legacy, it clutches at me, reminding me of what I must protect. His voice, usually so dominant, now wavered as it disclosed the internal conflict of a man torn between the desire for control and the dawning realization that true leadership might lie in sharing power. The corridor, lined with portraits of past rulers whose eyes seemed to judge the unfolding scene, bore silent witness to their exchange. As they spoke in tentative, halting voices, they pondered the sacrifices that awaited them. If I continue down this path, Amara wondered internally, will I lose myself entirely in duty? Or can I somehow preserve the essence of who I am, even while carrying the weight of the crown? Arik's mind echoed a similar query. Is it possible to relinquish some control without letting our kingdom fracture? Their dialogue was punctuated by long pauses, during which the unspoken questions hung heavily in the cold air. The tension was not merely the absence of sound, but an active, living force, a reminder that every hope for change was tempered by the enduring specter of the past. In these moments, both felt the immense burden of their newfound roles. Amara's inner battle was one of balancing the legacy of her defiance with the daunting promise of unity, while Arik struggled to free himself from the iron grip of his own traditions. As they gradually withdrew from the intimate space of their conversation, a lingering uncertainty clung to both. The echoes of their words mingled with the soft patter of footsteps along the palace corridor, leaving them to ponder a future still shrouded in doubt. Together, they had dared to envision a new paradigm, a shared leadership where power was divided, not hoarded. But the questions remained. Can our fragile alliance, born of necessity and tempered by mutual understanding, withstand the inevitable trials that lie ahead? And at what cost will we, individually and as partners, preserve our true selves while fulfilling the duties demanded of us? In the quiet darkness that followed, as each retreated further into their own thoughts, the only certainty was the uncertain promise of tomorrow. The night stretched on interminably, punctuated by the steady beat of anxious hearts and the soft, haunting refrain of unspoken dreams. Dreams of a kingdom reborn from the union of strength and vulnerability, and of leaders who dared to believe in a future where they were, finally, free. A kingdom on the edge. At the break of dawn, as the first pale light crept over the horizon, a solitary figure rode into the palace courtyard, a messenger whose arrival shattered the fragile calm that had settled over the kingdom. Clad in travel-worn armor and bearing an official seal of a rival realm, he dismounted with haste, his determined gaze fixed on the grand entryway, as if knowing all too well the gravity of the message he bore. The messenger's presence was like a harbinger of impending conflict. His words, delivered in a terse, unyielding tone, carried an ultimatum from a neighboring kingdom whose ambition and hostility had long simmered beneath the surface. "King Arik," he declared, his voice resonating off the palace walls with chilling clarity. "Your sovereignty is in question. If you refuse to meet our demands by the close of this fortnight, war shall be declared." The pronouncement sent a ripple of alarm throughout the gathered courtiers and nobles, every eye wide with the recognition of the high stakes unfolding before them. Inside the heart of the palace, the atmosphere was taut as a drawn bowstring. In the grand council chamber, where the glittering light of chandeliers once bathed the assembly in a confident glow, a palpable sense of urgency replaced the earlier optimism of unity. Maps, old scrolls, and imperial decrees lay scattered across polished tables, each piece of evidence of a kingdom that had thrived under centuries of unchallenged rule. Now, the delicate peace that had begun to bud from a shared vision between Amara and Arik was about to be tested by an external force determined to shatter that nascent alliance. Across the room, Amara's eyes met those of her trusted advisors, and even the rival alphas, expressions that mingled determination with apprehension. The cold light of early morning filtered through tall, narrow windows, casting long, wavering shadows upon the stone floor. Every line and curve of the shifting maps seemed to tremble with a renewed urgency, as if heralding the uncertain fate of a realm caught on the brink of chaos. The air was thick with silent, determined gazes, a shared understanding that each moment might tip the balance between lasting peace and the eruption of war. Amara, newly anointed yet still raw with the defiant sparks of recent transformation, stepped forward amid the murmur of voices that underscored the high stakes of the confrontation. Her voice, which had grown in strength through countless trials, rang out clearly. "We stand today not as victims of fate, but as architects of our future." The room fell into a heavy silence, every ear straining to catch the promise and the challenge in her tone. "Our enemies seek to undermine us, to force us into submission by questioning our right to exist as independent sovereigns. But we will not cower. We will not allow our past or our chains to dictate our destiny." Her words, interlaced with both resolve and a quiet hint of rebellion, resonated deeply among those assembled. In that charged moment, the council chamber transformed into a battlefield of ideals. Every phrase Amara uttered was like a spark flung against the tinder of old grudges and ancient hatreds. "We choose to negotiate on our own terms," she continued, eyes blazing with a combination of fierce determination and quiet insight. "We shall not be bullied into submission, nor shall we be cornered by the ambitions of those who would see us fractured and weak. Instead, we stand united, prepared to confront any challenge with the strength of our unity and the wisdom born of our shared experiences." Amid the hushed tension, Arik's gaze softened as he took in Amara's impassioned plea. A subtle acknowledgement that the new partnership between them held untapped potential. For a fleeting moment, the austere silence was broken only by the steady rustle of parchment and the shifting of chairs as advisors exchanged glances. The room was charged with a pivotal energy, the realization that the enemy's ultimatum was not just an external threat, but a catalyst that could redefine the very structure of their rule. The messenger, standing at the threshold of this renewed gathering, observed the unfolding scene with a keen awareness of the power dynamics at play. His presence, once so imposing, now seemed diminished by the resolve emanating from the heart of the assembly. The challenge that had been thrown at the kingdom was met with a unified, defiant response, a bold stand that would not be easily undermined. As the meeting neared its close, Amara's words reached every ear with a resounding declaration. "Let our terms be known, let our stance be clear. We will not bend, we will not break. We propose a meeting, a negotiation led by us, on our own terms, where the future of our kingdom will be determined not by fear, but by our unyielding unity. Only together can we forge the peace that we need. Only together can we shape a destiny that is truly our own." In that moment, as the stark light of dawn illuminated the determined faces of both allies and adversaries alike, a new resolve took shape. The council chamber, once a silent stage for grim reports and ancient decrees, now vibrated with the promise of change, a promise forged in the crucible of external challenge and internal solidarity. With hearts steeled by defiant ambition, Amara and Arik prepared to lead their people into a future where negotiations, not battles, would pave the way to a united, enduring peace. The power of words. In the grand, echoing halls of diplomacy, where the future of kingdoms is often decided by the sharp edge of eloquent discourse rather than the clash of swords, the negotiation scene unfolded with breathtaking intensity. The rival kingdom's representatives had gathered in a state-of-the-art assembly room that blended classical architecture with modern austerity, a space where every stone, every chandelier, and every carefully positioned seat spoke of centuries of power struggles. Today, however, the atmosphere was charged not only with the weight of history, but with the palpable energy of imminent change. Amara and Arik stood side by side at the head of a long, polished table that served as the neutral battleground for their high-stakes negotiations. Their united front, built on the foundation of mutual understanding and shared determination, radiated both force and finesse. The rival envoy, a stern-faced noble draped in the colors of his own kingdom, began the proceedings with a clipped tone that barely concealed the undercurrent of threat. "Your terms are unacceptable. We demand that you relinquish your claim to allied powers and submit to our sovereign control." His words were sharp and uncompromising, intended to unsettle and intimidate. Before any further challenge could be issued, Amara leaned forward, her voice clear and steady, as if honed by years of inner turmoil and recent rebellion. "We are not here to submit to control, or to be forced into submission by threats cloaked in aggressive rhetoric," she declared, her gaze unwavering and fierce. "Our strength is in our unity, and the future of our kingdom will be defined by collaboration, rather than conquest." Her words cut through the tension like a clarion call, and for a split second, the rival envoy's face flickered with a mixture of surprise and apprehension. Arik, whose presence had always been synonymous with iron-fisted authority, now revealed a softer, more deliberate intensity. "Indeed," he interjected, his voice resonating with a renewed confidence born of a hard-won partnership. "It is not the power we wield alone, but the power we share that will forge our destiny. Our proposed alliance is not an act of surrender, but a strategic move designed to safeguard our people and to establish a lasting peace on our own terms." His calm, measured words underscored a dramatic shift, a refusal to be dictated by external forces that had once threatened to overwhelm his kingdom. The room fell into a cinematic pause, heavy with anticipation as all eyes searched for cracks in this new facade of unity. The rival envoys exchanged furtive glances, their skepticism palpable even in the silence that ensued. It was as if the air itself had thickened, holding its breath as the possibility of diplomatic victory hung in the balance. Breaking the silence, Amara continued with a series of hook phrases that deepened the collective curiosity. "Imagine a realm," she said, "where alliances are forged not from fear, but from respect, where each treaty is a promise to build a future stronger than the sum of its parts. A kingdom united by the power of words, where every voice is heard and every decision is made for the prosperity of all." Her words, delivered with a mix of passion and strategic acuity, transformed the mood in the chamber. The very idea of such unity, so starkly contrasted with the bitter conflicts of old, began to resound with a quiet, growing enthusiasm. Arik's next words punctuated the air with commanding finality. "We stand here as one, not divided by the petty ambitions of a few, but united by a shared vision for tomorrow. Our resolve is as firm as the ancient stones upon which our kingdoms are built. If you wish to truly challenge us, know that we do not fear negotiation, for our strength lies in our collective wisdom and unbreakable will." His assertion reverberated through the hall, leaving no room for further dissent. The rival envoy's expression shifted from defiance to reluctant respect, as the reality of their united front became unmistakable. In a final breathtaking moment of triumph, the rival envoy slowly nodded. His admission that the united power of Amara and Arik could not be so easily undermined evident in his calculated gesture. Yet, even as a fragile peace was sealed in that hall, a lingering note of uncertainty remained. The soft clink of ceremonial artifacts and the quiet murmur of subdued conversations served as a gentle reminder. While this negotiation had been won with the power of words and unity, the peace they had secured was delicate, teetering on the edge of future challenges. As the delegates departed, leaving behind the somber glow of flickering candlelight and the heavy tapestry of their shared resolve, Amara and Arik shared a look, a silent exchange laden with the promise of unwavering partnership and the foreboding knowledge that the path ahead would test their newfound unity, time and time again. The power of words had brought victory today, yet both leaders understood that their journey was only just beginning, and that the real challenge lay in preserving this fragile peace against the ever-looming storm of rivalry and ambition. United in purpose. In the soft afterglow of the high-tension negotiations, the court's hushed murmurs subsided into a reflective quiet that seemed to envelop the entire palace. Later that evening, amid the fading light of day, Amara and Arik found themselves secluded in a private alcove tucked away from the scrutinizing eyes of courtiers and rival alphas alike. The grandeur of the negotiation chamber had given way to a much more personal space, a gentle refuge where raw, unguarded emotions could finally surface. As they sat side by side on a set of carved stone benches, the tension of the earlier confrontation began to dissolve into something more tender and transformative. The glow of a solitary lantern painted soft shadows on the ancient walls, and for a few fleeting moments, time itself seemed to pause, allowing each to truly see the other beyond the masks of power and defiance. Arik's imposing demeanor, once so unyielding and cold, now exhibited a delicate vulnerability. His eyes, still intense, softened as they met Amara's determined gaze. In that silent exchange, the promise of a partnership rooted in mutual respect and shared destiny emerged. Today, I witnessed something I never expected, Arik whispered, his voice unusually gentle. His hand, roughened by years of authority, reached out slowly, as if hesitating to bridge the gap between them. When their fingers finally interlocked, a simple yet profoundly symbolic gesture, the room seemed to exhale a long-held breath. The act spoke of an unspoken commitment, a promise that they were no longer adversaries bound by old habits of control, but partners ready to steer a greater future together. Amara's heart swelled with both hope and trepidation as she felt the warmth of their joined hands. The transformation of their relationship was palpable. Every shared glance and subtle squeeze resonated with the fervor of a new alliance. Yet even as the glow of unity illuminated the space between them, the lingering uncertainty of the path ahead cast long, wavering shadows on their resolve. She could sense that the road to true leadership would be fraught with inevitable challenges, old rivalries, the weight of legacy, and the daunting task of balancing authority with compassion. Arik, if we are to build a future for our people, Amara murmured softly, then we must do it together. Not as a master and his pawn, but as equal partners who listen, learn, and lead side by side. I believe in the strength we can harness together, even if it means facing our deepest insecurities. Her words, reflective and sincere, carried the weight of their shared trials, yet sparkled with the promise of a unity that could defy even the most relentless adversities. Arik's response was measured, thoughtful, a rare moment where his usual imperious tone yielded to a more introspective cadence. I, too, have wrestled with the old ways, Amara, he admitted, his gaze drifting to the intertwined hands resting on the cool stone. For so long I clung to control, as if it were the very essence of power. But in you, I see an equal, someone whose passion for our realm is as potent as my own. I want to believe that together, we can steer our kingdom toward a future defined not by the tyranny of tradition, but by the harmonious strength of partnership. His voice, laden with both hope and reluctant acknowledgement, echoed softly within the secluded space. The intimacy of their exchange was punctuated by a silence that was as eloquent as any spoken word. In that quiet, they both recognized the fragility of their newfound bond, a union that had only just begun to emerge from the tumult of past conflicts. The unspoken questions lingered. Could they, with all their inherited burdens and personal doubts, truly merge their distinct visions into one resilient, unified force? And if so, What sacrifices would be required from both to sustain such an alliance in the face of relentless external challenges? As the night deepened outside their hidden sanctuary, a gentle determination blossomed between them. The shared look in their eyes conveyed a promise that they would confront the future together, even if the road was uncertain and every step was steeped in risk. The soft rustle of silken robes and the distant rhythmic tick of an ornate clock in the hallway underscored the solemnity of the commitment they were making. In that tender, pivotal moment, Amara and Arik each silently vowed to nurture and protect this delicate partnership. Their eyes met once more, this time imbued with a quiet strength and the resolve to cast aside old patterns for the sake of a collective future. The vision of a realm led by unity, where each decision was made with the understanding that leadership is a shared burden, shone brightly in their minds, a beacon guiding them through the darkness of past misgivings into the promise of tomorrow. Thus, in the quiet aftermath of political strife and personal confrontation, a new chapter began. It was a chapter marked not by the imposition of will, but by the gentle yet unyielding power of togetherness, a future where unity, hope, and true leadership were woven into the very fabric of the kingdom. A new dawn for the kingdom, as the first hints of sunrise crept over the palace walls. The long, winding tale of Amara's transformation was finally coming full circle. In the gentle embrace of the early light, she stood on the balcony of her private chamber, reflecting on the arduous journey that had led her here, from a rebellious princess shackled by fate to the determined leader and true queen she had become. The memories of past defiance, heart-wrenching confrontations, and the quiet, emerging promise of unity resonated within her as clearly as the rhythmic ticking of the palace clock. Over these tumultuous months, Amara had wrestled with the weight of a destiny imposed upon her without consent. Her internal battle against the shackles of tradition, against the burning mark that had both scarred and defined her, was a struggle between fate and free will. She had learned that power was not measured solely by the strength to command, but also by the courage to be vulnerable. The clash between Arik's once domineering rule and his gradual embrace of shared leadership had provided the fertile soil for something entirely new, a partnership rooted in mutual trust and respect. Together, they had defied the notion that destiny was unchangeable. Within the opulent halls of the palace, once echoing with harsh commands and cold decrees, a softer cadence had begun to take hold. The transformation was evident in every gesture. The way Arik's hands, once clutched in a rigid grip, now relaxed into a gentle clasp with hers. In the subtle shift of his gaze, revealing tentative trust where there had once been only dominance. And in Amara, the spark of rebellion had grown into a blazing beacon of hope, a light that not only guided her path to freedom, but now promised a future built on collaboration rather than control. This was the birth of a new kind of partnership, one that challenged the age-old narrative of rulers and subjects, replacing it with a united front of two hearts and minds striving to reshape their kingdom. The journey had been long and fraught with uncertainty. Amara recalled the moments of bitter despair, when she had felt utterly isolated. Each echo of harsh words, every cold stare of disapproval, a reminder that her destiny had been written by forces beyond her control. Yet, with every trial, she had discovered an inner wellspring of strength. The crown, heavy with the weight of legacy, had become a symbol not of subjugation, but of her resilience and evolving agency. It was a visible reminder that even the most fated bonds could be redefined if one dared to challenge them. This transformation was not just her own. It was an invitation to everyone who believed that destiny need not be a prison. Amara's journey resonated with the timeless struggle between power and vulnerability, reminding us that true leadership is achieved when we learn to trust in ourselves and in those around us. It is a call to embrace change, to recognize that the forces that seek to control us can be resisted by the collective strength of unity and purpose. Now, as the new day broke over the kingdom, The palace stood bathed in soft, golden light, a visual metaphor for the transformative power of hope. The challenges ahead were many, and the road promised to be as treacherous as it was uncertain, but the spirit of renewal pulsed through every corridor and every heart within the realm. Amara and Arik had shown that even in the face of destiny's harshest decrees, there was room for evolution, a space where old wounds could heal, and a new legacy could be written by mutual respect and shared commitment. In this reflective epilogue, one is left to ponder the central themes that defined their saga: the battle between fate and free will, the unrelenting clash of power versus vulnerability, and the emergence of a partnership that transcended tradition. The courage to challenge what is deemed inevitable, to reshape bonds previously thought unbreakable, remains an inspiration to us all. It is a reminder that change is always possible, and that every seemingly fated relationship can, with determination and heart, be transformed into a union of equals. As we close this chapter on a new dawn for the kingdom, we invite you, our viewers, to share in this journey of transformation. What does leadership mean to you? How do you define the balance between control and collaboration in your own lives? Leave your thoughts and insights in the comments below. And if this story of defiance, hope, and unity resonates with you, please subscribe for more tales that challenge destiny and celebrate the power of the human spirit. Together, let's embrace a future where every dawn brings us closer to the freedom we seek.